I sat there frozen, the school gym's harsh lights buzzing above me as the laughter echoed across the folding chairs. She barely finished school herself. My daughter-in-law smirked, her voice sharp enough to cut skin. The words floated above the eighth-grade art projects like smoke, casual, cruel, and unforgettable. My son dropped his gaze, cheeks flushed, shrinking beside me. After 2 years of sheltering her rent-free, after raising her child as my own, after rebuilding a home from nothing, I was nothing. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights in the Lincoln Middle School gym buzzed faintly, washing everything in a tired yellow glow. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floor as parents shuffled to find their seats. Handmade posters, math projects, essays, a collage of watercolor portraits lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the refreshment table in the corner, though no one touched it. Too bitter, too thin, but it gave the illusion of welcome. Maggie adjusted the strap of her purse against her shoulder and forced herself to keep her chin high. She'd ironed her blouse 3 times before coming, worried over whether her shoes looked professional enough, whether her hair would frizz in the gym's heavy air. Brian walked a step ahead. Shoulders squared but eyes darting. At 13, he was already learning the art of shrinking in plain sight. Beside Maggie, Ruth clasped her arm. The older woman's grip was steady, her rings cool against Maggie's skin. "You look fine," Ruth murmured. "Just breathe." She'd been Maggie's anchor more than once, though she pretended it was casual companionship. The principal, Mr. Hutchins, welcomed the crowd, microphone squealing once before settling. He had a politician's smile, wide, quick, forgettable. Teachers sat in a line of folding chairs against the wall, each waiting for their turn to sing their own praises or soften concerns about struggling students. The parents applauded politely after every introduction. Maggie was just beginning to unclench her jaw when Kelly's voice broke through the routine chatter. "Oh, don't let Maggie fool you," Kelly said, turning her laugh toward Mr. Hutchins, then pivoting to the cluster of parents near her. She stood in a red blazer too sharp for a school gym, hair sprayed into immobility, every inch of her curated for command. She barely finished school herself. It hit like a snapped rubber band against Maggie's skin. A few parents chuckled, tight, awkward sounds more about politeness than amusement. The kind of laugh people make when they don't know what else to do. Brian's gaze dropped instantly to the floor, his sneakers suddenly fascinating. His ears reddened, his shoulders folding inward like paper wings. Maggie felt heat crawl up her neck into her cheeks. She pressed her lips together in something that was meant to be a smile but tasted of iron and ash. If she spoke now, the words would come out brittle, maybe break altogether. Ruth, sensing the tremor under Maggie's stillness, slid her hand into Maggie's. She squeezed once. Hard enough to ground her, whispering close, "Don't give her the satisfaction." Mr. Hutchins cleared his throat, shifting his papers with forced briskness. "Well, yes, thank you, Kelly," he said, not meeting Maggie's eyes. "Now, moving on, I'd like to highlight the 8th grade science fair." His voice grew louder, too cheerful, like throwing a blanket over a spill. But the air in the gym had changed. The comment lingered like smoke, impossible to wave away. Maggie's smile stayed pinned in place, though her teeth pressed into the inside of her cheek. Her pulse pounded in her ears. And all at once she felt every parent's gaze flicker toward her, measuring, reconsidering, filing her away under Kelly's careless label. The program continued. Applause rose and fell. Parents shifted. Kids slouched in chairs. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Inside Maggie, nothing did. Kelly leaned back in her chair, lips curved in the faintest grin of satisfaction. She didn't need to look at Maggie again. The damage was done. Maggie counted the seconds until the night ended, nails digging crescents into her palm. She thought about Brian, about the way he kept his head down, about how every laugh, however forced, was another weight pressing him lower. She thought about how Kelly always knew the exact moment to strike, how she never raised her voice, never cursed, never said anything you could pin down as outright cruelty. Just enough bite to draw blood without leaving visible wounds. When the final round of applause came, Maggie was the first to stand. She nodded at a teacher's compliment about Brian's essay, murmured thanks, and steered her son toward the doors. Ruth followed close behind, her hand still at Maggie's elbow like a quiet guardrail. The night air outside was sharp, cooler than she'd expected, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and gasoline from the parking lot. Maggie sucked it in greedily, as if she could rinse the sour taste of Kelly's voice from her mouth. Brian tugged his hood over his head, silent. He didn't look at her, didn't look at anyone. His small silence cut deeper than Kelly's words. Maggie wanted to tell him something, anything, that would stitch the moment back together. But her throat felt thick, her chest knotted. Ruth leaned close again. "Let it go," she whispered. "People like her. This is how they survive. Don't let her live in your head." Maggie nodded because nodding was easier than answering, but inside, she knew something had already shifted. She wasn't going to forget. Not the smirk, not the laugh, not the way her son folded himself smaller to survive a room that should have celebrated him. As they reached the car, Maggie's hand trembled on the door handle. Brian slid into the back seat without a word, earphones already in, face turned to the window. Ruth hesitated before climbing into the passenger seat. "You're quiet," she said softly. Maggie stared straight ahead, the glow of the gym's fluorescent lights spilling out into the night like a wound that refused to close. Finally, she spoke. "She thinks I'll let it go." Her voice was calm, too calm. "But I won't." The ride home was thick with unspoken words. The hum of the tires filled the silence, steady as a metronome. Streetlights slid across the windshield in fractured bars of orange, washing Ruth's profile in intermittent shadow. Brian stayed glued to his phone in the back seat, earphones in, pretending the world outside didn't exist. Maggie kept her hands at 10 and 2, fingers stiff around the steering wheel. She didn't trust herself to speak. Her voice might crack, and she wouldn't give Kelly the victory of echoing in her son's silence. When she pulled into the driveway, the porch light cast the siding of her house in pale gold. The little blue bungalow sat small but proud against the dark. She'd fought for every shingle, every nail. That place wasn't just walls and roof. It was proof she'd survived what should have broken her. "Go on in, sweetheart," she told Brian, finally breaking the quiet. He slipped out wordlessly, backpack hanging low. The screen door creaked shut behind him, and the house swallowed him whole. Ruth lingered by the passenger seat. "You want me to stay a while?" she asked gently. Maggie shook her head. "No, thanks." Ruth studied her face as though trying to read the words Maggie wasn't saying. Finally, she touched her shoulder. "Don't let it eat you alive." Then she turned, heels clicking softly against the pavement as she made her way to her car. When the sound of Ruth's engine faded, Maggie finally let out the breath she'd been holding since the gym. Her chest felt bruised from the pressure of containing it. Inside, the house was quiet except for the faint bass bleeding from Brian's room. Maggie hung her coat, slipped off her shoes, and padded down the hallway to her bedroom. She flicked on the lamp beside the dresser, its amber glow spilling across framed photos. Brian at 6 with a missing tooth. Brian at 10, grinning with a baseball trophy. Her eyes lingered there, then shifted to the small locked file cabinet tucked beside the dresser. She knelt, dug into the jewelry box on her nightstand, and fished out the tiny brass key. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt louder than it should have in the hushed room. Maggie slid the drawer open. Manila folders stacked neatly, each labeled in her precise handwriting. Mortgage, insurance, taxes, deed. Her fingers hovered before choosing one. She pulled free the folder marked deed and unfolded the papers with care, the way you handle something sacred. The paper had softened at the edges, the ink a little faded, but her name was clear. Just hers. Not Kelly's. Not anyone else's. Maggie's lips parted, her chest rising with a sudden rush of air. She laid the deed flat on the bedspread, then reached for another folder. Property taxes. Stubs, receipts, everyone bearing her signature, her checks, her money. The truth settled like a stone in water. Every brick, every board of this house was hers alone. Kelly had no claim, no tether to it. She could spin her gossip, toss her barbs in public, but in ink and law, she had nothing. A vibration against her nightstand broke the silence. Maggie's phone lit up. A message from Brian. Kelly didn't mean it. Her throat tightened. She read it twice, 3 times, as if repetition might unlock a meaning she could accept. Brian. Sweet. Careful, Brian. Already smoothing over insults, cushioning cruelty so it landed softer. Already carrying someone else's malice as though it were his burden to balance. Maggie's jaw clenched. She set the phone down without answering. Her gaze returned to the papers spread across the quilt. They seemed to glow in the lamplight, a quiet reminder of everything she'd fought through. The double shifts, the dinners skipped, the nights she'd cried in silence so Brian wouldn't hear. She had earned this house inch by inch, nail by nail. Kelly might sneer in a school gym, but she didn't know the ledger Maggie kept. One not written in dollars, but in endurance. Maggie gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, slid them back into the drawer, and turned the key with a decisive snap. Her heart drummed hard, steady, purposeful. As she rose, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Brian, shorter this time, hesitant. Don't be mad. Her hand stilled over the lamp switch. She looked at his words, the tiny plea embedded in them. Not for Kelly. For her. He was trying to hold them both steady as if that was his job. Maggie whispered into the empty room. I'm not mad at you. But she was furious. At Kelly. At the way poison disguised itself as casual banter. At the way a single careless sentence could unravel years of quiet repair. Maggie flicked off the lamp. Darkness wrapped the room, but inside her chest something blazed hot, unyielding. She had the proof now, the power she hadn't realized she held, and Kelly had no idea. Maggie sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, the house silent around her, her hands curled into fists. And for the first time she wondered, not if, but how, she might use that silence against her. The neon sign of Riverside Diner flickered against the pale morning sky, its red letters buzzing faintly above the glass doors. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of bacon grease and coffee that had been on the burner too long. Plates clattered, conversations overlapped, and somewhere in the back, the jukebox droned out an old country song no one was really listening to. Maggie slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seat cracked from years of use. She traced the edge of the sugar packet holder while waiting, her fingers restless. Sleep hadn't come easily the night before. She'd replayed Kelly's words over and over until they echoed louder than her own breath. The bell over the door jingled, and Ruth swept in, hair tucked beneath a wool cap, scarf draped loosely around her neck. She spotted Maggie immediately, lifted 2 fingers in greeting, and made her way over. Ruth didn't ease into a room, she claimed it, even in a place as small and ordinary as this. You look like hell, Ruth said without ceremony, sliding into the booth. She flagged down the waitress with a practiced flick of her hand. Coffee black. Maggie gave a hollow laugh. That bad, huh? Ruth leaned forward, elbows on the table, sharp eyes fixed on Maggie's face. Worse. Now tell me what she said. The words stuck in Maggie's throat, but they tumbled out anyway. She described the gym, the rows of parents, the way Kelly's voice had carried across the space like a blade disguised as a joke. She admitted how Brian had wilted under the laughter, how every forced chuckle still rang in her ears. Ruth's jaw tightened. When the waitress set down 2 steaming mugs, Ruth wrapped her hands around hers but didn't sip. Instead, she slammed it against the table so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. Heads turned briefly from other booths, but Ruth didn't flinch. "Cut her off," she said flatly. Maggie blinked, startled by the force of it. "You heard me?" Ruth went on. "She's been living off your generosity for too damn long. No rent, no bills, no responsibility. She struts around like she owns the place, and you let her." "Why?" The diner noise swelled around them, but Maggie heard only the thrum of her own pulse. She reached for her napkin, folding it once, then again, each crease sharp and precise. "I thought I was helping," Maggie whispered. "She needed a place. I didn't want to turn her away." Ruth's laugh was humorless. "Helping? Maggie, she's been helping herself. You've been carrying her dead weight while she drags your name through the mud. That's not help. That's theft. Only dressed prettier." Maggie pressed the folded napkin flat against the table. Her mind flicked back to the locked drawer, the deed, the receipts. Her name stamped on every line. The house was hers. Every inch of it. "She never paid a dime," Ruth said, softer now, but no less firm. "Not once." The napkin tore slightly beneath Maggie's thumb. She didn't lift her gaze from it. Instead, she smoothed the ripped edge with deliberate care, as if tidying even paper could restore a sense of control. The truth hung between them. Kelly wasn't just cruel, she was a parasite, and Maggie had allowed it. Ruth leaned closer, voice dropping low. "You've given her shelter, comfort, stability. And how does she repay you? By humiliating you in front of the whole damn school. Don't you see? She'll keep taking until you stop her." Maggie finally raised her eyes. Ruth's expression wasn't pity. It was steel, tempered by years of seeing exactly how the world chewed up women who played nice too long. The waitress swung by to refill their mugs, breaking the spell for a moment. Maggie murmured thanks, then stared at the swirl of steam rising from her cup. A decision was coiling inside her, slow but certain, like a storm front building out of sight. "She doesn't know," Maggie said at last. Her voice surprised her, steady, controlled. "About the papers, about the house." Ruth's eyebrows lifted. "Good. Don't tell her. Let her keep thinking she's got ground under her feet while you're the one holding the floorboards." Maggie set the napkin down, its folds neat despite the tear. She rested her palms flat against the table, as if anchoring herself. "She thinks I won't do it," Maggie murmured. Ruth tilted her head. "Won't do what?" Maggie met her gaze, something dangerous flickering at the edges of her calm. "Take it all back." The clatter of dishes and murmur of voices carried on around them, oblivious. But in that booth, under the dim glow of the diner lights, Maggie felt the axis of her life tilt. Ruth smiled then, not soft, but approving. The kind of smile that said finally. Outside the window, a gust of wind rattled the diner's neon sign, making the red letters buzz louder. Maggie's reflection stared back at her in the glass, sharper, less hesitant than the night before. She wrapped her hands around her mug, heat seeping into her skin, and whispered more to herself than to Ruth. "She has no idea what's coming." Alan's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. A tall clock ticked steadily in the corner, filling the quiet between papers shuffling and pens scratching from the reception desk outside. Maggie sat in a leather chair that had lost some of its shine, the armrest cool under her palms. Alan adjusted his glasses, gray brows furrowed as he leaned over the manila folder Maggie had handed him. The morning sun angled through the blinds, striping the oak desk in bars of light and shadow. "So," Alan said, his voice measured. "She's been living there rent-free. How long?" Maggie clasped her hands to still them. "Nearly 2 years. At first I thought I was doing her a favor. She had nowhere else to go. But she's made herself too comfortable. And last night—" Her throat tightened. She forced the words out anyway. "She mocked me. In front of Brian. In front of everyone." Alan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He pushed the folder open, scanning the deed. "Your name's the only one here. No joint ownership, no co-signer, nothing tying her legally." Maggie nodded once. Her chest swelled with a strange mixture of shame and relief. Shame for how long she'd allowed the arrangement. Relief at the clarity of Alan's tone. He set the paper flat against the desk, tapped it with his finger. "Then you have every right to act. She's a guest. Nothing more." The word guest struck Maggie like a spark. She thought of Kelly striding through her kitchen as if she owned it, stacking her designer shoes in the front hall, sneering over bills she never paid. Guest, not partner, not co-owner, just someone she had let in too far. Alan reached for a form from the stack behind him. He slid it forward, the pages crisp, the header bold. "Notice to vacate." "This is the first step," he explained. 30 days. Legal, binding. If she doesn't comply, we escalate. But given the circumstances, I suspect she'll fold fast." Maggie picked up the pen he offered. Its weight felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink it carried could alter more than paper. Her mind flashed to Brian's downturned face in the school gym, the way his shoulders had sagged. She remembered Ruth's mug slamming against the diner table, her voice cutting sharp as glass. Cut her off. Maggie lowered the pen to the line. Her hand was steady, deliberate. She signed her name in careful strokes, letters flowing one into the next without hesitation. Alan gathered the papers, slipped them into a slim folder, and closed it with a quiet finality. "I'll file this with the county office today. You'll have official copies soon." The ticking clock filled the silence again. For the first time in days, Maggie felt the air in her lungs expand without burning. Alan offered a faint smile, professional, but warm. "You're doing the right thing." She rose, smoothing the front of her blouse. "Feels overdue." "Most good decisions are," he replied. The county building was brighter, newer than Alan's office, glass walls and polished tile floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Maggie followed the clerk's directions down a wide hallway to a desk marked Property Division. Behind it sat Sharon, a woman with kind eyes and a bob of dark hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Sharon accepted the folder from Maggie, flipped through the pages, and nodded with brisk efficiency. "Looks in order. Let's make it official." She reached for a heavy rubber stamp, inked it, and pressed it hard against the bottom of the notice. The thunk echoed off the marble counter. When Sharon lifted the stamp, the red seal blazed bright. Filed. Maggie exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the cool countertop. The mark felt like armor, something she could finally wield instead of just endure. Sharon slid the stamped copy across to her. "You'll want to keep this safe. 30 days from now, it's enforceable." Maggie tucked it into her bag, her pulse thrumming. She thanked Sharon, turned, and walked back down the polished hallway. Her heels clicked with a rhythm that felt new, decisive, unstoppable. Outside, the late afternoon air bit at her cheeks, but Maggie hardly noticed. The folder in her bag was warm against her side, as if carrying its own pulse. She unlocked her car, slid inside, and gripped the wheel. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine Kelly's face when the envelope landed in her hands. The surprise, the disbelief, the inevitable sputtering outrage. The thought curled Maggie's lips into something that wasn't quite a smile. Too sharp, too controlled. Her phone buzzed against the console. A new message. She picked it up, expecting Ruth or maybe Brian, but the screen showed a different name. Kelly. Where are you? We need to talk. Maggie's fingers tightened around the phone. Kelly's heels clicked against the linoleum as if the kitchen floor were a runway made just for her. She swung open cabinets, peered inside, and let the doors slam shut again, her laughter spilling out like perfume, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. God, I love my place, she declared, stretching the words as if she were on stage. She twirled once in front of the stove, her blazer flashing scarlet against the pale walls. So much potential if I could just convince you to redo this kitchen. Honestly, it's embarrassing. Maggie stirred sugar into her coffee, back turned, face neutral. The spoon tapped gently against the mug, steady, almost soothing. From the doorway, Brian shifted awkwardly, clutching an apple he hadn't bothered to bite. We could knock down that wall, he said, his voice pitched too high, trying to sound casual. Make it, like, open concept. He grinned weakly, the joke meant to bridge the distance between the women. Kelly's laugh sliced through the room. See? Even he knows this place is begging for renovations. A real upgrade. Something fresh. Something modern. Not this. She gestured with a manicured finger toward the wallpaper, faded flowers curling in muted yellow and green. This screams Grandma's basement. Maggie turned at last, coffee steaming in her hand. She walked to the table with quiet steps, placed a mug in front of Kelly, and sat down opposite her. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her lips curved politely. She simply nodded once, as if Kelly's assessment deserved no defense. Kelly sipped, grimaced at the bitterness, and set the mug down with an exaggerated sigh. Honestly, Maggie, I don't know how you live like this. But don't worry, when I put my touch on it, everyone's going to want to come here for holidays. Maggie lifted her own cup, let the heat seep into her palms, and hid her smile behind the rim. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and Brian's restless shifting. Kelly flipped through a magazine she had pulled from the counter, making little noises of disapproval at outdated recipes and faded photographs. Maggie's phone buzzed on the table. The sound was small but electric, vibrating against the wood. She glanced at the screen. Alan. It's done. She's been served. Her pulse surged, steady but powerful, like an undercurrent pulling everything toward its inevitable break. She slid the phone closer, thumb hovering over the screen before pressing it dark. Kelly didn't notice. She was already on her feet again, waving her hand as though directing an invisible crew. We'll start with the kitchen. New counters, stainless appliances. Maybe knock out that awful pantry. Then the bathrooms. This house has good bones. It just needs someone with vision. Maggie let her gaze drift to the sunlight pouring through the window above the sink. Dust motes shimmered like gold in the air, dancing silently while Kelly's voice filled every corner. Brian finally bit into the apple, the crunch startling in the tense quiet. He chewed quickly, eyes darting between the women. Guess that means we're, renovating? He said, his tone an uneasy half-joke. Kelly ruffled his hair as she passed, oblivious to his discomfort. Exactly. Renovating our home. The words rang with ownership, sharp as a knife scraping glass. Maggie set her mug down with care, the porcelain making a soft, deliberate click against the table. She met Kelly's eyes across the room and smiled. Small, knowing, impenetrable. Of course, Maggie said softly. Kelly mistook the calm for concession. She grinned wide, triumphant, and turned back toward the wallpaper. Already planning colors Maggie would never choose. But Maggie's fingers brushed the phone again, tracing its smooth edge like the hilt of a hidden weapon. The eviction notice sat waiting in Kelly's mailbox, its red seal already stamped, the clock already ticking. Maggie took another sip of coffee, her gaze steady on Kelly's back. And for the first time, she felt no heat in her cheeks, no sting in her chest, only quiet power. The late afternoon sun slanted through the front windows, painting long stripes across the living room floor. Brian sat slouched on the couch with a game controller in hand, though the screen remained paused. Maggie stood at the folding table by the laundry basket, smoothing shirts into neat squares, the quiet rhythm of her hands a steady counterpoint to the house's usual noise. The thud of the mailbox echoed faintly outside, followed by the rustle of envelopes sliding onto the entry rug. Kelly's heels struck the floorboards seconds later. She swept through the front hall, humming under her breath, flipping through the stack of mail with practiced disinterest. Bills, junk, junk, she muttered, tearing one envelope at the edge with her thumb. Then she stopped. A thick official notice, the seal stamped in bold red across the top. She turned it over, frowned, and ripped it open. The paper unfolded in her hands, the type crisp and unavoidable. Her jaw slackened, her lips parted soundlessly before a strangled laugh forced its way out. What the hell is this? Brian glanced up, confused, controller slipping from his hands onto the carpet. What's wrong? Kelly's eyes skimmed the lines again, faster this time, panic tightening the set of her mouth. She clutched the paper as though holding it harder might change the words. Her voice cracked when she read aloud. Notice to vacate. Brian blinked, frozen. Across the room, Maggie placed another folded shirt onto the growing stack. Her expression didn't change. Her motions remained precise, almost serene. Kelly spun toward her, the notice shaking in her grip. You can't do this. Maggie lifted a towel, smoothed it flat. Folded it once, then again. She looked up at last, her gaze steady, unblinking. It's already done. The words dropped like stones in the silence. Brian's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. His gaze darted between the two women, his face pale. Mom, what does this mean? Kelly advanced a step, the paper crumpling in her fist. It means your mother has lost her damn mind. She's throwing me out of my house. Maggie placed the towel neatly onto the pile. Her hands rested on the cotton for a beat longer, grounding herself. Not yours, she said quietly. Never was. Kelly's face flushed crimson. She jabbed the notice in Maggie's direction. You think a piece of paper makes you queen of the castle? You think you can erase everything I've built here? Brian flinched at the volume, his voice breaking as he tried to cut in. Wait, both of you, can we just… Maggie didn't look away from Kelly. Her calm was almost unbearable against Kelly's rising fury. This isn't about erasing anything, it's about setting things right. Kelly barked a bitter laugh, pacing in a tight circle. Setting things right? You ungrateful, after everything I've done for this place. Maggie's eyebrow arched faintly. Name one bill you've paid. Kelly froze mid-step. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Brian pressed his palms to his knees, eyes darting nervously. Is this real? Like, she really has to leave? Maggie turned her gaze toward him then, her voice gentler. Yes, sweetheart. It's legal. Kelly rounded on him, desperate now. Brian, you can't let her do this. You like having me here, don't you? We make this house fun. Her voice faltered, sharp edges crumbling into pleading. You don't want me gone? Brian shrank back into the couch cushions, caught in the crossfire, his silence damning. Maggie stacked the last of the laundry and set the basket aside. She stood tall, her voice calm but absolute. 30 days. Kelly's breathing quickened. She crushed the notice in her hand until the paper wrinkled into a hard ball. Her eyes blazed as she spat the words, You'll regret this. Maggie met her fury with stillness. No, I won't. The house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, a car passed on the street, its tires hissing on the pavement. Inside, only the soft tick of the hallway clock broke the silence. Kelly's heels struck hard against the floor as she stormed down the hall, slamming her bedroom door so violently the picture frames on the wall rattled. Brian looked at his mother, wide-eyed, as if seeing her for the first time. "Mom," he whispered, his voice caught between awe and fear. Maggie picked up the wrinkled paper Kelly had dropped on the floor. She smoothed it carefully against her palm, the red seal still bright, unshaken. She glanced toward Brian, her eyes unreadable. "This is just the beginning." Kelly's fury didn't stay caged behind her bedroom door for long. By nightfall, it had spilled onto glowing screens. She perched on the edge of her bed, the notice crumpled beside her, typing furiously into Facebook's blank white box. Each keystroke hammered like a nail. "Imagine being betrayed by the very woman you welcomed into your heart. Kicked out of the home I've nurtured for years. Me, after everything I've given this family. 30 days to disappear, because bitterness rules over gratitude." The post went live with a flourish of her manicured finger. The likes and sympathetic comments rolled in faster than she could refresh. Heart emojis, "You deserve better," platitudes, and private messages lit up her feed. Kelly leaned back against her pillows, basking in the glow of digital sympathy, each ping a little spark feeding her conviction. She wasn't prepared for the other side of it. 2 towns over, Maggie's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter as she wiped down the stovetop. She ignored the first ding, then the second. By the 5th, she dried her hands, slid her glasses back up the bridge of her nose, and picked up the phone. A group text from her cousin Marlene appeared first. "Is this about you?" Attached was a screenshot of Kelly's post, Kelly's carefully chosen words dripping across the screen in black font. Another message came from her sister-in-law Denise. "You seeing this nonsense?" Screenshot. Then another, from a niece Maggie barely spoke to anymore. Screenshot after screenshot, her inbox filled with Kelly's online theatrics. Maggie stared at the glowing device in her palm. She didn't sigh, didn't roll her eyes, just tapped open her messages and typed back a single reply to Marlene. She has 30 days. No further explanation. No defensive speech. Send. Out in her garage, Ruth nearly dropped her wrench when her phone chirped. She wiped her greasy hands on a rag, squinted at the message from Maggie, and then opened one of the forwarded screenshots. Kelly's post stared back at her in all its melodrama. Ruth let out a bark of laughter that startled her dog from its nap in the corner. 30 days, huh?" she muttered, still chuckling as she read the comments. Strangers siding with Kelly, pity dripping in their responses. "Oh, honey, you've got no idea what storm you're kicking up." She shook her head, laughter deepening, the sound echoing against the cement walls. Across town, Sharon sat at her desk, the bluish glow of her computer reflecting off her glasses. She'd seen the post too. Word traveled fast in a small community. But unlike the others, Sharon didn't waste a second entertaining it. She clicked through digital forms, scanned signatures, checked dates. When her fingers finally stilled on the keyboard, she leaned back in her chair, satisfied. A new email zipped across cyberspace and landed in Maggie's inbox. The subject line read, "Paperwork filed." Inside, Sharon's words were crisp, businesslike. "Everything's in order. She has 30 days to vacate. You're covered." Maggie read the email once, then again, her thumb pressing absently against the rim of her coffee cup. The house was quiet now. Brian had retreated to his room hours ago, headphones clamped over his ears, his silence a shield against the tension clawing at the walls. Kelly remained shut away too, but Maggie knew the silence above her head wasn't rest. It was scheming, typing, spinning tales. She didn't linger in the kitchen. She set her phone down, slipped into her jacket, and carried the watering can out to the backyard. The cool night air greeted her, sharp with the scent of damp soil and grass. The garden stretched in orderly rows, neat as her folded laundry, each patch carefully tended over seasons. Maggie tipped the can, water splashing over the roots of marigolds, then the roses, then the tomatoes still holding stubborn to their green fruit. She let her shoulders drop, the day's weight lifting with each pour of water. In the quiet, the sound of droplets striking leaves was its own kind of music. She breathed deep, grounding herself in the steady rhythm she could control. But as she moved toward the far corner of the garden, her gaze caught the faint glow from an upstairs window, Kelly's room. The curtains didn't quite close all the way. Maggie froze, the watering can suspended mid-pour. Through that narrow slice, Kelly's silhouette was visible, bent close to her phone. The blue light lit her face like a screen-lit mask, her expression twisted, animated, almost gleeful. Her fingers moved in frantic bursts, tapping, swiping, posting. Maggie's chest tightened, not with fear, but with certainty. The 30 days would not be quiet. She set the watering can down, straightened her spine, and stared up at that window until her neck ached. Somewhere inside, another notification pinged, another story told, another lie spreading, and Maggie knew. The next battle wouldn't be fought in living rooms or kitchens. It had already leapt to a battlefield she hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, bright and merciless. Maggie sat at the table with a steaming mug, the faint clink of her spoon stirring sugar into the tea, the only sound in the house. The silence shattered with the slap of Kelly's bare feet storming down the hall. She entered like a storm cell gathering speed, the eviction notice, creased, wrinkled, nearly torn, clutched in her hand. "Rescind it!" Kelly's voice cracked sharp as broken glass. She slapped the paper onto the table so hard the mug rattled. Maggie didn't flinch. She reached for her phone on the counter, thumb pressing a button in one clean motion. A red dot glowed quietly on the screen. The device sat face up beside her cup, recording every syllable. "You hear me?" Kelly demanded, leaning close. "You're not doing this to me. I won't allow it." From the doorway, Brian hovered, eyes wide, hands balled into fists at his sides. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Maybe we can just talk this through. Mom, Kelly, there has to be some way." Kelly spun toward him, hair whipping across her shoulders. "Stay out of this." Her tone was slicing, venomous. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see it?" Maggie's spoon clinked once more against the cup. She set it aside and lifted the mug, steam curling upward. Her gaze stayed fixed on the pale swirl of liquid, as though Kelly weren't standing inches away, flinging demands like stones. The calm only enraged Kelly further. She paced in a tight circle, words spilling faster, harsher. "You think you're some saint, sitting there with your tea, acting like this house bends to your will. You're nothing but a bitter old hag who can't stand anyone younger. Prettier, better getting the attention you never earned." Brian flinched as though the insult had struck him instead. His voice cracked when he tried again. "Kelly, stop, please. Just stop talking like that." But she didn't stop. She jabbed her finger at Maggie, her voice rising with each sentence. "You've leeched off this family long enough. You think a piece of paper makes you queen of this place? You're pathetic. Everyone knows it. That's why nobody comes around anymore. They can't stand you." Maggie raised her eyes at last. The quiet weight of her stare was worse than any shouted retort. She took a slow sip of tea, the faint chime of her bracelet against the porcelain marking the only response. Brian's breathing grew uneven. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. "We can't keep doing this. We can't live like this." His voice broke on the last word, desperation clear. Kelly sneered, lips curling. Don't you dare take her side. Don't you forget who stood up for you when your own mother— Her words cut short at the sound of the front door creaking open. Heavy footsteps echoed across the hardwood. Ruth stepped into the kitchen, her work boots thudding like punctuation. She carried the smell of engine oil and morning air, her hair tied back, her jaw set hard. Her eyes landed on Kelly first, narrowing with a glare sharp enough to slice. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Kelly's bravado faltered, but only for a flicker. She crossed her arms, shoulders tight, her mouth pressed into a defiant line. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "What's going on here?" The words dropped low, steady, a warning more than a question. Kelly tried to muster indignation, but the confidence in her voice wavered. She's trying to ruin me. This woman is tearing our family apart." Ruth's gaze flicked to Maggie, then back to Kelly. She took 2 slow steps forward, her boots heavy against the tile, until she stood between them. Her posture alone made the air feel smaller, tighter. Maggie set her mug down gently, the red recording light still glowing beside it. She didn't speak, but the faint curve of her mouth suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. Kelly's breath hitched, the fight suddenly harder to summon under Ruth's stare. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, color rising in her cheeks. Brian pressed his back to the wall, eyes darting between all 3 women, his chest rising and falling too fast. Ruth leaned closer to Kelly, her voice low, dangerous in its restraint. "Be very careful with what you say next." The kitchen went silent, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. Kelly opened her mouth, but whether it was to lash out or to back down, no one would ever know. Because at that moment, Maggie's phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up with a new message. The name flashing across it froze Kelly's words in her throat. And Maggie's calm eyes finally broke into something sharper. Something that promised the next move was already in play. The name glowing on Maggie's buzzing phone made Ruth's glare sharpen even more. Alan Parker, her brother-in-law. A man who spoke little but always carried weight when he did. Maggie slid the phone into her palm, pressing the green icon. She didn't leave the kitchen, didn't give Kelly the satisfaction of privacy. "Alan," she said, her voice even. His reply came through, steady and clipped. "I got your message. Pulled the county records, double-checked statutes. She has no lease, no rental agreement. Maggie. She's got no legal foothold here. At all." Kelly's spine stiffened, arms crossing tighter. "That's a lie," she snapped, stepping closer. "I've been here for years. That counts for something." Alan's voice carried through the speaker like a gavel. "Time doesn't grant rights when nothing's in writing. She's a guest in your house, Maggie. Guests can be told to leave." Ruth's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. "Figures," she muttered, folding her arms. "All that mouth and not a single receipt." Kelly whipped toward her, cheeks burning. "Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." Brian's voice cracked through the thick tension, startling even himself. He had pressed his back harder against the wall, but now he spoke like something inside him finally gave way. "She's right, Kelly. You never contributed. Not once." His chest heaved, his words spilling faster. "Not rent, not utilities, not even groceries. Mom covered it all. I covered it all when she couldn't. You just lived here." Kelly blinked, stunned, as if Brian had physically struck her. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Maggie held the phone steady, her gaze locked on Kelly, unflinching. "Thank you, Alan. That's all I needed." She ended the call with a soft tap, the sound final. Kelly's face twisted, rage overtaking shock. "You think you can erase me with your paperwork and your smug little rules? This house has my life in it. My things, my memories. You can't just cut me out." Maggie placed her phone carefully beside the cooling tea. Her nod was deliberate, calm, as though anchoring herself against the tempest in front of her. "You'll collect your things. The rest stays here." The air split with the violent slam of Kelly's palm against the doorframe. She spun, storming down the hall with the kind of force that made picture frames rattle on the walls. A second later, her bedroom door crashed shut, the echo reverberating through every room like thunder. Brian sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His voice was muffled but raw. "I should have said something sooner." Ruth's boots scraped against the floor as she shifted her weight, her eyes still fixed on the hallway Kelly had vanished into. "Doesn't matter. You said it now." And she heard it. Maggie reached for her tea again, her fingers curling steady around the mug. She didn't drink. She just held it, letting the heat sink into her palms. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Patience wound tight. The house quieted, the storm sealed behind Kelly's locked door. But Maggie knew. Doors could slam, walls could shake, voices could break. None of it mattered now. The law, the truth, the paper trail. They were all on her side. Still, she kept her gaze on that hallway. Because for all her calm, for all the certainty Alan's words had given her, Maggie felt it in her bones. Kelly wasn't done, and whatever she planned next would not come quietly. The following evening, Maggie's phone rang again. Alan's voice carried its usual weight, grounded, steady, no room for panic. "I've gone through every angle," he said. "She can rant, she can scream, she can post whatever she wants online. But in a courtroom, she's got nothing. No contract, no lease, no payments. Even if she tried to make it a fight, it wouldn't last 5 minutes." Maggie cradled the receiver against her shoulder, her hands busy tying an apron around her waist. The oven hummed behind her, the faint sweet scent of cookie dough already drifting through the house. She listened, nodded once, and replied with only 2 words. "Thank you." Alan's tone softened, almost like he was smiling. "You'll sleep easier tonight, Maggie. Trust me." But Maggie knew sleep would never come easy, not while Kelly still stalked the halls upstairs. Kelly, meanwhile, didn't waste her frustration. She translated it into cryptic, pointed posts. "Funny how people smile in your face while sharpening knives behind your back. Family? More like parasites who bleed you dry." Each line floated into the digital void, collecting comments from acquaintances and distant relatives who didn't know the full story. Kelly answered with vague replies, feigning the wounded hero. Hearts and "stay strong" emojis stacked beneath her words like scaffolding, giving her a false tower to stand on. Behind closed curtains, she scrolled obsessively, refreshing, watching the sympathy accumulate. At school the next morning, Brian sat slouched at his desk, his shoulders heavy under the weight of whispers. 2 classmates snickered as he passed in the hall. No words, just looks that told him his mother's private war was bleeding into public spaces. He avoided eye contact, shoved his earbuds in, and sank into the back row of history class. When a friend leaned over and asked, "Hey, is it true your mom's throwing Kelly out?" Brian's throat locked. He shook his head, muttered, "I don't want to talk about it," and turned away. The teacher's voice droned at the front of the room, but Brian couldn't hear it. All he heard was Kelly's shouting echoing in his memory, louder than any lesson. Across town, Ruth dropped into her chair at quilting group, a needle already threaded in her calloused fingers. The other women leaned in, curiosity buzzing, but Ruth just grinned. "She's stomping around like a rooster with no spurs," she said, flicking her wrist with mock flair. Laughter rippled around the circle. "Posting all kinds of nonsense, acting like she's queen of the trailer park. But the truth? Girl's about to get booted faster than yesterday's casserole." Her words had the group doubled over, the sharp sound of their cackles cutting through the steady hum of sewing machines. Ruth smirked, satisfied, the image of Kelly's scowl fueling her wit. 30 days, she added, snipping a loose thread. And believe me, she'll feel every one of 'em. Back in her own kitchen, Maggie hummed under her breath, a tune from no place in particular, just something she carried while sliding trays of cookies into the oven. The sugar and butter, the simple alchemy of flour and eggs, filled the house with warmth. For the first time in days, her hands worked at something soft, yielding, uncomplicated. She rolled dough into neat circles, lined them in even rows, her mind finding rhythm in the ordinary. The front hall was quiet. Kelly hadn't emerged since her latest outburst, not even to snarl. Maggie knew better than to mistake the silence for surrender. Still, she hummed. She let the sound anchor her, kept her focus on the dough, on the steady ticking of the kitchen clock, on anything that belonged to her control. Her laptop chimed on the counter. A new email. She wiped her hands on a towel, clicked it open. Alan's message appeared in bold. Case secure. Nothing she files will stand. You're clear. Maggie read the line twice, then let the smallest exhale slip free. Not victory. Not relief. Just the acknowledgement of ground solid under her feet. She clicked the lid shut, turned back to the cookies, slid the last tray into the oven. And just as she closed the door, a sound tore through the stillness, a sharp, deliberate slam from upstairs. Maggie froze, flour still dusting her hands. The slam wasn't rage this time. It was rhythm, a signal. And she knew, without even looking up, that Kelly had just started something she hadn't bothered to announce. Cardboard scraped against hardwood as Kelly shoved another box across the floor. The sound screeched through the hall, loud enough to carry into every corner of the house. She had stacked 3 boxes already, each one half filled with clothes tossed haphazardly from drawers, shoes thrown in without pairs, photo frames rattling against makeup bags. The 4th box she kicked toward the doorway, muttering under her breath. They think they can erase me. They think I'll leave like a stray dog. Her voice rose into a brittle shout. I'll take everything that's mine, and nobody can stop me. Maggie stepped into the hall, wiping her palms against her skirt. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even frown. She simply placed herself in the doorway, spine straight, hands folded loosely in front of her. That's far enough, she said. Kelly froze, box balanced at her knee. Her eyes narrowed, lips curling into a sneer. You don't get to tell me what's mine. She shoved the box forward another inch, daring Maggie to move. But Maggie didn't budge. Her stillness filled the hallway more powerfully than shouting ever could. You'll pack what belongs to you, Maggie said evenly. Clothes, personal things, nothing else leaves this house. The calm tone sliced deeper than anger. Kelly's face twisted, veins standing in her neck. I have rights. You can't block me from what's mine. You think you're untouchable because of some stupid notice? I'll drag you into court. Her words broke into a scream. I'll burn this whole place down before I walk out empty-handed. Brian appeared from his room, hair messy, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He pressed his palms out toward both women, voice shaking. Stop. Please, can we have one morning without tearing each other apart? Kelly's glare darted toward him, her fury redirected. You think she's helping you? She's controlling you, Brian. You're too blind to see it. You'll regret choosing her over me. Brian flinched, his throat tight, but didn't answer. He just whispered, I can't do this anymore, and sank onto the edge of the couch, his head buried in his hands. From the shadows near the front door, Ruth leaned against the wall, her phone raised, recording every second. The tiny red light blinked steadily. She didn't interrupt, didn't taunt. Her silence spoke louder, proof gathering frame by frame. Kelly caught sight of the lens and snarled, "Turn that off. You don't have permission." Ruth lowered the phone just slightly, her eyes cool. "Public disturbance doesn't need permission." She tilted the screen so Kelly could see the recording time ticking up. "Keep going, you're doing great." Kelly's scream cracked higher, her fists clenching. She grabbed the nearest box and heaved it against the wall, the cardboard bursting open, clothes and broken frames spilling across the floor. "This is harassment. I'll call the cops myself." Maggie's voice stayed calm, though her heart hammered. "Go ahead." The air seemed to vibrate with tension, every sound amplified. The ragged wheeze of Kelly's breath, the distant tick of the hallway clock, the soft shuffle of Brian's sneakers as he rocked against the couch edge. And then a knock rattled the front door. Hard. Firm. Kelly froze, panic flickering in her eyes. Ruth smirked, sliding her phone into her pocket. "Guess you don't need to dial." Two uniformed officers stepped inside after Maggie opened the door. Their presence filled the hall with instant authority. One of them spoke in a calm, practiced tone. "We got a disturbance call." Kelly surged forward, jabbing her finger at Maggie. "Yes, that's her. She's throwing me out illegally, stealing my things, blocking me from leaving." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. We'll sort this out." He turned to Maggie. "Is this your residence?" Maggie nodded once. "Yes, I own this home." "And she?" the second officer asked. "A guest," Maggie replied, her voice steady. "No lease, no rent, just a guest who's been told to vacate." Kelly let out a wild laugh, half snarled, half panicked. "She's lying. She can't prove—" Ruth stepped forward, pulling her phone from her pocket again. "You want proof? Got a full 10 minutes right here." She waved the device slightly, her grin sharp, including the part where she threatened arson. The officers exchanged a look. One of them sighed. "Ma'am," he said to Kelly, "the homeowner has the right to ask you to leave. If you've been served notice, there's no case here." Kelly's face drained of color, then flushed deep red. "This is corruption. You're all against me." She shoved past one of the officers, slamming into her room. A door cracked shut again, shaking the picture frames on the wall. The silence that followed was heavy, but different this time. Less storm, more aftermath. The officers turned back to Maggie. "We'll file a report," one said. "But legally, you're in the clear. Just be careful until she's gone." Maggie inclined her head. "Thank you, officers." The door closed behind them, their presence gone as quickly as it had arrived. For a long moment, no one moved. Brian stared at the floor. Ruth crossed her arms, her phone warm in her pocket. Maggie stood in the hall, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe, her gaze fixed on the closed door at the end of the hall. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the house. "She won't leave it here." And everyone knew she was right. The law office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Light slanted through tall windows, striping the hardwood floor. Maggie sat in a leather-backed chair, her handbag resting neatly at her feet, her hands folded tight in her lap. Alan Parker leaned across his desk, glasses low on his nose, scanning the file in front of him. His office was orderly, every pen aligned, every binder labeled. It suited him. No space for chaos, no room for guesswork. "We'll make it simple," Alan said, his voice steady. "Clean lines, no wiggle room." He slid a blank form across the desk, his pen poised. "You're certain about this?" Maggie's nod was deliberate. "Yes." He waited a beat, searching her face for hesitation. There was none. She spoke evenly, her words measured but unyielding. "Kelly is not to receive anything from me. Not this house, not money, not even furniture. She has no place in my affairs." Alan gave one short nod, his pen scratching across paper. Each stroke felt final, like the hammering of nails into a coffin lid. "And Brian?" he asked. Maggie's shoulders softened. "He stays. He'll have the house, the accounts, everything meant to keep him steady when I can't anymore." She drew a quiet breath before adding, "And one more thing. I want a portion set aside. The literacy fund at the library. They've been struggling. It deserves support." Alan glanced up, his expression warmed with approval. A sound choice. He returned to writing, the soft rasp of his pen filling the room. Every clause he crafted locked Kelly further outside the circle of Maggie's life. The door creaked open. Ruth stepped in, her boots announcing her presence. She tugged off her jacket and slung it over a chair, eyes sharp but curious. "You ready for me?" Alan looked up. "As witness? Yes. You'll need to sign after Maggie does." Ruth grinned, tapping her chest with 2 fingers. "Gladly. I've been waiting for this." Maggie allowed herself a faint smile. "Don't gloat too much. This is about protecting, not punishing." Ruth chuckled under her breath, taking the spare seat beside her. "Sure, protection, with a sweet side of payback." Alan swiveled the document toward Maggie. "Read it carefully." She took the papers in both hands, her eyes scanning line after line. The language was dense, but she didn't stumble. She absorbed every clause, every stipulation. When she reached the end, her signature flowed across the page in firm strokes. Ruth followed, signing her name with a flourish. She leaned back, satisfied, while Alan blotted the ink and stacked the papers into a folder. "There," Alan said, his tone final. "It's filed, as airtight as I can make it." Maggie exhaled, long and steady, as though she'd been holding her breath for weeks. A weight lifted from her chest, leaving her posture straighter, her shoulders lighter. She gathered her bag, stood, and smoothed her coat sleeve. Alan rose with her. "This doesn't solve every problem, but it makes sure Kelly can't touch what matters most. Not now. Not ever." Maggie's gaze held his. "That's all I needed." The 3 of them walked out together, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the quiet hallway. Outside, the late afternoon sun fell golden across the parking lot. Maggie paused on the steps, tilted her face toward the warmth, and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt lighter, untethered, prepared. But across town, Kelly sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop balanced in front of her, the blue glow casting hard shadows across her face. A smirk tugged at her lips as she typed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting something not legal, but just as dangerous. A post already half-written waited on the screen. Names bold, accusations sharp, her story sharpened into a weapon she planned to hurl into the world before sundown. And she whispered to herself, almost giddy, "If they won't let me in their will, I'll make sure they drown in mine." Brian sat hunched on the back steps, the twilight sinking around him. His elbows rested on his knees, hands dragging down his face. He didn't hear the crickets or the soft shuffle of leaves. Only his own voice, low and breaking, filled the air. "I loved her, Mom." The words cracked as if admitting them cut deeper than silence ever could. I thought she cared. And now all I see is how much of it was fake. How much of it was just her needing somewhere to stay." Maggie eased down beside him, her knees stiff from the effort. She didn't reach for him right away. She let his words spill, let him scrape the hurt out of himself. Brian's chest heaved. "I should have known. The late-night posts, the drama, the way she never gave anything back. But I wanted to believe it was more than that I wasn't just—" He cut himself short, choking on the word used. Maggie placed her hand lightly over his, not forcing, not gripping, just there. "You believed what she wanted you to," she said gently. "That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He turned his face toward her, eyes red, voice hoarse. "You're not going to let her come back, are you?" Her answer was quiet but absolute. "No." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly, even as fresh grief shimmered across his face. For the first time, Maggie pulled him close, her arm around his shoulders, his weight heavy against her. She offered comfort, but not compromise. 2 mornings later, the sound of a moving truck broke the neighborhood stillness. Kelly's laughter, too loud, too brittle, floated out the front door as she carried boxes, flinging them into the truck bed. Neighbors slowed their cars to watch. Curtains shifted across the street. Someone whispered near the corner, "Heard she got thrown out." Another muttered, "About time." Kelly slammed the truck's back gate closed, her chin lifted high, as though pretending dignity could mask the truth. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't look at Brian. Inside, Maggie watched from the window. Her face was unreadable, her fingers curled around a coffee mug she never lifted to her lips. Only when the truck rolled out of sight did she exhale, long and steady, as if releasing months of poison from her chest. That afternoon, Ruth showed up with a bundle of grocery store flowers, bright yellows and pinks bursting against the brown paper wrap. She tossed them onto the counter with a grin. "Peace lilies were sold out," she said, "so I went with daisies. Felt right for a fresh start." Maggie allowed herself the faintest smile. "They'll do." Ruth leaned her elbows on the counter, watching her. "You should have seen the way the quilting circle lit up when I told them she was gone. I swear, they're planning a potluck in your honor." Maggie shook her head, a soft chuckle escaping. "Let's not make a spectacle." Ruth snorted. "Honey, you already made one. Might as well get cake out of it." A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail, the logo of the local library stamped in the corner. Maggie slid it open with a paring knife and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Ms. Whitaker," it began, the words printed neat and formal. "Your generous gift to our literacy fund will keep our evening reading programs alive this year. On behalf of the families we serve, thank you." She read it twice, then pressed the letter flat against the counter with her palm. Something warm stirred in her chest. Not triumph, not vengeance. Something quieter. Renewal. That weekend, Maggie knelt in her garden with a trowel, dirt caked under her nails. She dug small, even holes along the fence line, sliding bulbs into the earth one by one. Tulips, she thought. By spring, they would stand tall where there had once been only weeds. She brushed her palms clean against her jeans, looked up at the sky streaked pink with evening light, and felt a steadiness settle into her bones. For the first time, the house seemed to exhale with her. She pressed the last mound of soil down, patting it smooth. But as she leaned back on her heels, a sharp sound cut the quiet, her phone buzzing against the porch rail. She reached for it, squinting at the screen. A new message. The sender's name made her breath catch. Kelly. And the preview line, half visible before she opened it, was enough to send a chill running through her veins. "You think this is over?" The news came not with shouting or spectacle, but through whispers that rippled across town like wind through tall grass. A neighbor mentioned it at the grocery store checkout. Someone else repeated it in the church parking lot. By dusk, Maggie heard it plainly. Kelly had filed for bankruptcy. It was almost anticlimactic, the way a storm sometimes passed without thunder, leaving only flattened grass in its wake. Brian heard it too. He came home late, shoulders heavy, his backpack sliding to the floor with a thud. He didn't say anything at first, just sank into the kitchen chair, staring at his hands. "She's broke," he murmured finally, voice flat. "Everything she bragged about, every story she told, it was all fake. She doesn't have anything." Maggie set down the dish towel she'd been folding and leaned against the counter. She didn't answer with cruelty or glee, only steady truth. "Now you know why she clung so hard. Because she had nothing else." Brian rubbed his palms over his eyes, exhaling sharp. I've got to figure things out for myself now. Without her. His words carried both defeat and determination. I don't know where to start, but I have to start somewhere. Maggie crossed the room and laid a hand on his shoulder. She didn't tell him it would be easy. She didn't tell him it would be fine. She just squeezed. A quiet anchor. And let him feel her presence. The house gleamed more than it had in years. Maggie hummed softly as she dusted the mantel, the steady rhythm of her rag moving in circles. The scent of lemon cleaner mingled with fresh air drifting in from open windows. Each surface she wiped clear seemed to breathe lighter, unburdened by chaos. She paused at the doorway, surveying the space. No scattered shoes, no discarded handbags, no shrill interruptions, only quiet. Her home. By mid-afternoon, Ruth appeared at the door, a pie tin balanced in her grip. "Apple," she announced, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. "Still warm. Thought you deserved something sweet?" Maggie arched a brow. "That's twice now you've shown up with food. Are you trying to fatten me up?" Ruth grinned, setting the pie down. "Honey, you've been through hell. Let me feed you before you fade into a wisp." She leaned on the counter, her tone shifting softer. "Word's out about Kelly. Folks are talking. Not pity, though, admiration. They're saying you held the line." Maggie's lips curved faintly. "I wasn't looking for applause." "Doesn't matter," Ruth said, cutting 2 slices. "Sometimes you get it anyway." The next morning, Maggie stepped onto the porch to find an envelope propped against the doorframe. Heavy cream paper, her name printed across it in formal script. She carried it inside, slid it open, and unfolded the contents. Inside lay a framed certificate, the library's seal pressed in blue at the bottom. Across the top, in bold, elegant font, with deepest gratitude. The note inside was handwritten this time. "Because of your generosity, our programs will continue to serve families who need us most. You've planted something lasting." Maggie traced the embossed letters with her fingertips, the weight of the frame solid in her hands. It was more than thanks. It was proof of impact, a legacy already alive. She hung it on the wall above her desk, straightened it with care, and stepped back. For once, the house felt not only safe, but meaningful. That night, as she washed the last plate and set it in the rack, the phone buzzed on the counter. She dried her hands and picked it up. A new voicemail waited. The caller ID froze her breath for a second. Unknown number. She pressed play, holding the phone to her ear. A crackle of static filled the line, followed by a voice she hadn't expected to hear again so soon. Kelly's. Low, deliberate, almost amused. "You really think bankruptcy means I've got nothing left to lose?" The message ended with silence. Maggie stood frozen in her spotless kitchen, the drip of water from the faucet the only sound. Her house was clean. Her affairs in order. But Kelly's voice had slithered back in like smoke, and smoke always meant fire. Spring sunlight spilled across the yard, warm enough to soften the soil beneath Maggie's knees. Her hands pressed into the earth, dirt cool and damp, as she dug small hollows for tulip bulbs, already pushing green tips toward the sky. The fence line now bloomed with neat rows of color. Reds, yellows, pale pinks, standing straight where weeds once tangled. She brushed the soil from her palms, sat back on her heels, and closed her eyes. The air smelled of lilacs from the neighbor's hedge, and the distant whine of a lawnmower hummed like background music. For the first time in years, the garden wasn't a place she escaped to. It was the heart of her home. The screen door creaked open behind her. Brian stepped onto the porch, shoulders squared but lighter than before, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his jacket. He hesitated, watching her a moment before walking down the steps. "Looks good," he said, his voice quiet but steadier than it had been in months. Maggie wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. It's getting there. He crouched beside her, pulling at a stray weed. His eyes were clearer, his posture straighter. The shadows of heartbreak still lingered, but the sharp edge had dulled. I started at the rec center, he said, helping coach Little League. Figured it was something to do. Something that isn't, you know. Maggie tilted her head, smiling faintly. That's good, sweetheart. He met her gaze for a fleeting second before looking back to the soil. Feels good. Like building something new. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between them felt whole instead of fractured. Later that afternoon, Maggie sat on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. Ruth dropped into the chair beside her, boots kicked out, sunglasses perched on her head. She pulled a cookie from a napkin in her pocket, bit into it, and laughed loud enough to startle a bird from the railing. Can you believe it? Ruth grinned, brushing crumbs from her shirt. We made it through. The storm's over, and you're still standing. Maggie sipped her tea, the ice clinking gently against the glass. Storms pass, she said simply. Ruth leaned back, letting the swing creak beneath their weight. Yeah, but some leave the house flattened. Yours? Stronger than before? She tilted her head toward the tulips lining the yard. Prettier, too. Maggie allowed herself a small chuckle. I'll take that. That evening, the mail brought a stack of envelopes, most unremarkable. But one stood out. A holiday card, crisp white, Alan Parker's handwriting across the front. Inside, a simple message. Wishing you peace and strength this season. You've earned both. Maggie traced the words with her thumb before setting the card on the mantel, propped neatly beside the framed certificate from the Literacy Fund. The newsletter had arrived the week before, its glossy cover featuring children gathered around stacks of new books. Inside, in bold letters, one headline read, The Dawson Gift, a legacy of literacy. Maggie had read it 3 times, each time pausing at the line thanking her by name. Not because she needed recognition, but because it proved she had built something bigger than conflict. Something lasting. Dusk fell, painting the house in amber glow. Maggie stood at the porch railing, watching the tulips sway gently in the evening breeze. Her shoulders were strong, her hands steady, her heart unburdened. The walls behind her no longer echoed with shouting. The silence was hers now, not imposed, but earned. She took a slow breath, tasting spring in the air, and let the truth settle into her bones. Kelly had taken her peace for months, had scraped at her resolve, had tried to claw her way into permanence. But Maggie had ended it, not with fury, not with spectacle, but with steadiness sharpened into steel. Her lips curved as she whispered the truth aloud, words soft yet carrying the final weight of the war. She ended my respect in public. I ended her free living in private,